Star Wars Dark Disciple is a novel that kind of felt like a Romeo and Juliet style doomed romance set in the Star Wars universe with a story by Katie Lucas, the daughter of Star Wars creator George Lucas, but adapted for the page by Christie Golden, a key architect behind Star Wars Legends' final series, The Fate of the Jedi. The book was announced at San Diego Comic-Con 2014 and was part of the first wave of canon Star Wars novels following the end of Legends and the beginning of Star Wars' new Disney-era continuity. The story of the novel was originally intended for the 7th season of Star Wars The Clone Wars, but as that show kind of went through a late-era turbulence following the Disney acquisition, that was canceled in favor of Disney's new show set in the dark times, Star Wars Rebels. In 19 BBY, the Clone Wars were raging on for a few years, with Count Dooku growing more combative and brutal. Following a merciless separatist attack at Marquis, Quinlan Vos, a Jedi specializing in undercover work, is tasked with assassinating Count Dooku and ending the Clone Wars once and for all. With his death, or at least ruin, separatist morale would perhaps lower enough to end the brutality. Quinlan seeks out Asajj Ventress, Dooku's former Padawan, who now works in bounty hunting, who he believes holds the key to unraveling Dooku. The pair pretty quickly strike up a partnership and rapport that eventually leads to the duo falling in love, and Quinlan Vos admitting he is a Jedi, with Quinlan learning he needs to embrace the dark side but not succumb to it to defeat a Sith as powerful as Count Dooku. Ventress trains Quinlan in these methods, but the Jedi fears going down a dark path. All this while their romance progresses, and Quinlan considers leaving the Jedi to build a life with Ventress. They go off the grid from the Jedi, eventually confronting Dooku, but the mission goes south, with Quinlan being captured and learning that Ventress had a secret, with Dooku revealing she brutally killed his master. He doesn't believe it at first, but Quinlan has a Jedi power that allows him to connect to objects through the Force, and after touching his former master's lightsaber, he sees Dooku wasn't lying. This causes Quinlan to spiral and succumb to the dark side, pushing off Ventress, who attempted to rescue him and hoping to kill her. The Jedi concerned seek out Ventress, who agrees to help them save Vos, which they eventually do, with the Jedi seemingly prisoner of Count Dooku, perhaps unturned. He is eventually cleared for duty, but after his first few missions go awry, the Jedi suspect he may be a Sith now, and are potentially seeking the death penalty to stop the threat of Quinlan Vos before it gets worse. He is sent to assassinate Count Dooku so they can see how he reacts, and while it seems he wants to kill Dooku before striking a killing blow, he asks to see Dooku's master. Unbeknownst to him, Anakin and Obi-Wan are following him, and saw the whole ordeal, capturing both Quinlan and Dooku in the process. Realizing that Quinlan had been turned. Though while Anakin and Obi-Wan are reporting this, Quinlan and Dooku escape, being picked up by a confused Asajj Ventress, who Quinlan tasked with picking them up. She is pissed because she hates Dooku, but the three are now on the run and crash land on Christophsis, where Anakin and Obi-Wan plan to strike the trio down, though Obi-Wan has a nagging feeling that perhaps Asajj isn't to blame for this. Cornered in a base, Asajj tries to pull Quinlan towards their love and telling him to forget the Jedi and Sith bullshit. Though Dooku tries killing Quinlan for backing out on being a Sith, he is convinced to go with Asajj, who then sacrifices herself for Quinlan, with Dooku escaping after seemingly murdering his former Padawan. Months later, Quinlan is reformed, and when the time is right, is escorted by Obi-Wan to Dathomir, where he can put Asajj to rest by her fellow Night Sisters, with the Jedi realizing that the desperate act of calling for Dooku's assassination and forcing Quinlan down a dark path was their wrongdoing, and that further harm was only prevented by Asajj. Noting that one of the greatest adversaries of the early Clone Wars eventually proved herself to be truly redeemed and actually an ally of the Jedi and the path of the light. And then, with no explanation at all, Asajj is just alive in the Bad Batch because Dave Filoni doesn't give a fuck about no books. What you think, a man with a hat like that can read?
You may join me and your sisters in this realm, or you may return to the land of the living.
Quinlan Vos is the lead of this novel. He was mostly known for his role in the Star Wars comic series from 1998, in which he was basically the main character, based upon a background character from The Phantom Menace. Through this, the character slowly became a player in the Clone Wars, which would have eventually seen this arc. This book sees Quinlan Vos, a Jedi who rides the edge between light and dark more than most, tasked with assassinating Dooku, and even with his slightly sketchy nature, he still thinks killing Dooku might be a bit much. This is of course subject to strict debate by the Jedi Council as well. Dooku's getting more brutal and treating life like it's nothing, which is sort of a reason some Jedi think it would be better to just take him out and kill him. He eventually teams up with Asajj Ventress, a semi-reformed Sith acolyte who he pretty quickly grows physically and mentally attracted to. This of course is a problem since Jedi can't forge attachments, much less with a Sith acolyte who has killed many allies in the past. Much like the story of Romeo and Juliet, Quinlan and Asajj's relationship is strictly outlawed. Though this starts to become less of a problem for Quinlan as Asajj starts teaching Quinlan to flirt with the dark side, telling him not to embrace it, and knowing that someone without dark side power and a bit of dark side edge wouldn't be able to kill Dooku, which kind of reminds me of like Vergere in the New Jedi Order novels. Jedi mercy would be their undoing in this case. This works fine for a time, but eventually leads to an identity crisis and a full corruption to the dark side. Quinlan joining Dooku for a time as his apprentice and committing a few war crimes in that time, as is pretty standard for Sith acolytes. This dark side energy really manifested as he started to fall in love with Ventress, and even more so when he learns that Ventress killed his master, making him succumb to the seduction of the dark side, with him assuming Ventress's love was nothing but a manipulation tactic, which ended up being untrue, Ventress genuinely loving the man. Eventually, Vos is pulled back, but Mace Windu remains skeptical that the Jedi is actually truly back on the straight and narrow the way he claims. This ends up true when it turns out the darkness was in him a bit, and this was part of Dooku's plan. Mace assuming Quinlan is gone and needs to be executed, but voices like Obi-Wan Kenobi kind of call him out on his shit a bit, since Mace was the one who created this path, and thus this whole mess in the process, since Mace proposed Dooku's execution in the first place at the Jedi Council meeting. Eventually, the power of love does bring him back, but that soon gets replaced with grief when Asajj Ventress is struck down by her former master. Eventually, the truth comes out a bit. Turns out Quinlan wanted to use Dooku's influence to infiltrate the Sith and take them both out, ending the problem, but he got in over his head and became a real Sith. Oopsie. Asajj Ventress became a Dark Jedi bounty hunter thing after leaving Count Dooku in her past and choosing to no longer engage with the Sith since Count Dooku treated her like shit, and also because she started seeing the evil in everything she did. She hopes to move Quinlan close enough to the dark side that he can beat Dooku, seeing it as the only way to win the battle with his former master. Though her and Quinlan start having a bit of a forbidden romance made more complicated by her being forced to murder his master during her days as a Sith acolyte. She thinks, however, if Quinlan learns the dark side from the Night Sister perspective, which is more controlled than the Sith, she can rein him in and bring him back, though this eventually moves to her hoping to run off with Quinlan after he kills Dooku, freeing her from that threat and him from the Jedi Order in the name of their love. But when Quinlan learns the true fate of his master, he turns on her and flips to the dark side for a time before being reeled back in. The two actually largely make for a good couple, and seeing the Sith struggle to become a Jedi is interesting, largely in a way that is a unique twist on the formula we saw many times in Star Wars media past, where a good Jedi becomes an evil Sith. Now we're seeing the inverse of that. Asajj believes the Sith are evil, but also sees that evil is necessary to beat worse evil, so she's kind of confused on that front. Ultimately, she dies saving Quinlan during the climax, though this would eventually be retconned by the king of Star Wars reincarnations, the man who made death nothing to Star Wars, Dave Filoni, during his show Tales of the Underworld in the first episode, A Way Forward. When the Night Sister Talzin tells her that Quinlan's love mixed with a Night Sister pit will bring her back to life, despite the character being implied dead for literal weeks before she's laid to rest. Whatever. I guess the Force Lazarus pit exists in Star Wars now, so I guess keep an eye out for that. If any other characters you like are dead, I'm looking at you, Mace Windu. We'll see you back in the Mandalorian Grogu movie where you smirk at the camera and say, "No one's ever really gone," or something corny like that, and then ignite his purple blade, which will make Grogu clap in delight or something. It's modern Star Wars slop that aimed to undercut the actual good death that saw these lovers tragically separated. Mace Windu is a prick in this novel, and more so than normal. He and Anakin are under the impression Dooku needs to be assassinated, following a terrorist attack the Sith Lord conducted. Mace suspects that Quinlan has been corrupted after his turn to the dark side. He thinks he should be executed as well, which doesn't really feel like the Jedi way and kind of defies the character's stark belief in the Jedi Code earlier on, but Mace has been known to take things further than other Jedi in the Order. I feel they may have pushed the character a bit too far on this front, in my opinion. It just doesn't totally seem like Mace Windu to me. Windu is too big of a prick in this novel, and he is honestly one of the only points of contention I have, since he is kind of a soft antagonist when he is also the one who set this whole plot off. It's kind of weird. Mace was meticulous in Star Wars. He even wanted to let Palpatine live, till he obviously couldn't be contained in Revenge of the Sith after striking down some of his fellow council members, so I don't really buy him ordering a fellow master's execution after this mission was moderately botched. It just doesn't track to me. Dathomir in this novel reclaims Ventress, and it's sad to see a character redeemed go out to help the wider galaxy and to help the man she loves that ultimately she would never have. It's Shakespeare-esque, you know. Specifically Romeo and Juliet, which clearly sees many thematic allusions within this story. Obi-Wan is kind of Mace Windu's counterpoint. He's been friends with Quinlan going way back, the duo kind of working together since they were young, going through the Jedi Order more or less together, being around the same age. Obi-Wan talks Mace and the Council out of execution, but I still think the Jedi pushing him into this situation should have been addressed, since clearly, considering killing Quinlan is bullshit given the context of what happened. He is also so calm, he actually hopes to help his former adversary, Ventress, and is even fairly chill with Quinlan Vos and Ventress's relationship, and even understands why he considered leaving the Order, reflecting his own relative chillness with Anakin and Padme's relationship in Revenge of the Sith when that revelation came out to him. He is a Jedi ahead of his time, understanding the Order doesn't 100% work as is, and sometimes is a bit up its own ass about things. Count Dooku is a terrible, evil person. In flashbacks, we see how ruthless he was, breaking down Asajj into a weapon he hopes to use till her usefulness runs out. He commits a huge terrorist attack, killing hundreds of civilians just to gain a tactical advantage, and he is just utter evil. This leads to the Jedi Council hoping to have him assassinated, something both Windu and Anakin hope to seek out before Yoda basically says the duo can't be trusted to handle that responsibility. Thus Quinlan was sent, and we see firsthand why assassinations are not the Jedi way. Perhaps this also calls forward to Luke defying Yoda and Obi-Wan's ghost when they urged him to strike down his father in Return of the Jedi.
There is still good in him.
He's more machine now than man. Twisted and evil.
I can't do it, Ben.
Revenge leads to the dark side. This is a clear path. It never turns out well. Of course, we see Anakin's assassination of Dooku and how that was the match that accelerated the Sith fire within him, since Anakin had to embrace the dark side to assassinate Dooku, as we would see in the Revenge of the Sith novel and in the film to an extent. This also perhaps works to slightly justify why Obi-Wan didn't kill Vader in the Obi-Wan show, which regardless of context, I still find to be kind of subpar. Anyways, watch my Obi-Wan television show video review. It's in my Star Wars playlist linked at the end of the video. This book was based around an 8-episode super arc designed by Katie Lucas for the Clone Wars TV show, which she worked on a bit here and there and under the guidance of Dave Filoni and her father. And ironically, while George has a hard time properly writing emotion, I find Katie to have done a pretty good job. Though of course she only consulted on the book, she didn't put pen to paper, but I like the concept at the very least, and I think the romance is pretty well done. This book very much plays like the Clone Wars tonally, meaning action-packed, fun, dramatic, but not nearly as openly dark or lingering as many of the novels, since this is a modification of several fast-paced TV episodes. However, I think the novel format works well for the story, since it also feels very literary, and as I said, reflects William Shakespeare's most famous work, Romeo and Juliet. It is a tragedy and love story about people from opposite worlds who realize despite their differences, they are also very similar, and like Romeo and Juliet, it could never be with Asajj Ventress's death. The dynamics of the Jedi and the Sith mostly work, though as I said, I think Mace Windu's character and motivations are perhaps stretching the character past how he truly acts in most stories, but other than that, works pretty well. I would have liked some material from Aayla Secura, since in Legends she was created for the comics and adopted for the films by George Lucas after, and I thought she was cool in the comics, and her character was essential to Quinlan Voss's lore since she was his apprentice for a time. Not a huge deal, but perhaps some of the dark side scenes could have featured her since I think she's a pretty interesting character for the most part. This book was technically written for Legends, but first and foremost was written to tie into the Clone Wars show, so it mostly translates well since that show was the only thing that wasn't George's original 6 Star Wars films that were pulled into the modern continuity upon the reboot. Some stuff works odd in the canon. For one, Asajj has a yellow lightsaber in the introduction, but canonically this would have been before she received the lightsaber, so you'll just have to mentally pull that somehow or just ignore it, as continuity errors happen in all of these books, shows, and movies constantly. It's not that big of a deal. You're just gonna have to deal with it. Anyhow, this is a solid adventure with some roots to the creator, a foot in the Clone Wars, a foot in canon, and adapted by one of the key late-era Legends novelists, which all make this an interesting read. The novel is good fun, and if you're just getting into Star Wars novels, this totally aligns well with the Clone Wars cartoon and can be a decent spot to start for people experimenting with going deeper into the weeds beyond the visual mediums of television or film that the majority of fans reside in. Or if you're just looking for a little more Clone Wars, this is a good way to get that feeling for just a little bit longer.